of Ahmedabad. I welcome you all to 14th clinic today. And today we have a very reputed and experienced doctor, Dr. Mohan Ramchandani. I would like to invite my longtime friend and a senior gastroenterologist who is director and gastroenterologist at Mission Gastro Hospital, Ahmedabad, Dr. Chirag N. Shah. He has a very good grip on academics as well as advanced endoscopy, so he will be moderating the session. So, Dr. Chirag, I request you to introduce our other faculties who are chairpersons, and then Dr. Rashesh can introduce sir.
Thank you, Dr. Yogesh. It has always been pleasure to chair the session with you and moderate with you. So here we have Dr. Rashesh Solanki, who is a senior GI surgeon and he's affiliated to many hospitals in the city, and he's also attached to medical colleges. So it is good to have an academician like him in this discussion. And Dr. Yash Sangvi, who is a senior surgeon in the eastern part of the city, and he will also contribute to the academic discussion. I'll request Dr. Rashesh and Dr. Yash to introduce Dr. Mohan Ramchandani, and we take it from there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chirag, for the kind introduction. Yash, with your permission, I will speak first and introduce Dr. Mohan. Actually, he does not need introduction. He's a senior gastroenterologist, therapeutic endoscopist, and I'm told that he is a third space specialist, also third space endoscopy specialist also. His areas of interest are especially small bowel endoscopy, especially the spiral endoscopy, in which he is an expert, and he continues to train and teach junior colleagues and DNB aspirants, DNB students. And he's also a master in therapeutic endo ultrasound. And I am sure, and I know that we will all benefit from his presence today, and he will gain insights into the management of this special and difficult problem. Thank you. Dr. Yash, is he there? He wants to say something.
Dr. Ram, sir, you can start your session now, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Yogesh, Chirag, and Dr. Yash for your kind introduction. Can you see my slides?
No, sir, not yet.
Oh. Why it is not coming? Previously, it was coming.
Your video is visible though, sir.
Yeah, I know. I have my slides on my background, but it's not coming. Dr. Solanki, can I join? I'll just switch off and come back. Is it?
Yeah,
Please,
sure.
please.
You can try Alter S once.
What?
Alter S.
Mine is this one.
MacBook.
Yeah. I'll just join back.
Okay.
Yeah, please. So to start the ball rolling, Dr. Chirag, what is one significant advance that you can tell us in the last decade or so? Now we are finishing this decade. Of course, there is small bowel, this one, capsule endoscopy. Okay, fine. I think he's found his slide. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was supposed to speak on GI bleed, especially the obscure and occult GI bleed, and what are the recent advances. So let's go to the one particular case which I recently saw. This was a patient who is 41-year-old male. He presented with recurrent episodes of melena since last 3 months. And in last 3 months, he has required 32 transfusions. He had chronic pancreatitis with head mass, which was inflammatory, and he had associated portal vein thrombosis. So he had obstructive jaundice because of the pancreatic head mass, which was benign, and gastric outlet obstruction. So he underwent gastrojejunostomy with hepaticojejunostomy in 2010. He has presented to us with tachycardia. Everything other was hemodynamic was absolutely all right because he was not massively bleeding, but he was bleeding. No jaundice because he has good HJ stoma, which was working. And there was no stigmata of chronic liver disease also. There was mild splenomegaly, and digital rectal examination has shown that there was no mass tenderness, good sphincter tone, but old dark melena was seen while doing per-rectal examination. Other systemic examinations were normal. So his hemoglobin was 4, and his liver function test, even creatinine, everything was normal. So as a routine, we do endoscopy. Endoscopy, we did not find any bleed. There was a GJ stoma, but there was small, very small varices. So it was not the cause of GI bleed. Colonoscopy was also normal. So now here we have a patient who has 32 transfusion in last 3 months with history of surgery, portal vein thrombosis, and he has GI bleed, which we are not able to locate by the routine investigations available like upper GI endoscopy or colonoscopy. So now my question is, what is your diagnosis and what would you do for this patient? So this is the case which we want to, as a baseline case to carry forward our discussion today. And the bleeding, the obscure GI bleed, the bleeding from GIT that persists or reoccur after a negative initial evaluation, including bidirectional endoscopy, which we did today, and radiological imaging with small bowel follow through or enterocolitis was normal. So this is the previous definition of obscure GI bleed, which included small bowel study. But now, in 2019 onwards, given the efficacy of new imaging modalities and deep enteroscopy, the prior classification of obscure GI bleed should be reserved for patients in whom GI bleed source cannot be demonstrated after extensive evaluation with capsule endoscopy and balloon assisted endoscopy. So now we have an armamentarium where we have enteroscopy and balloon assisted enteroscopy, and we should always do a CT and scan and a balloon assisted enteroscopy or capsule endoscopy to say that this is obscure. So now our obscure definition is going more forward. There are many cases which remain obscure even after that, but we should at least do a capsule endoscopy and a CT scan whenever we see a patient who has GI bleed and in whom upper GI endoscopy and colonoscopy are normal. So the bleed can be overt, like a visible blood in stool, like this patient. We have patient who has melena, who says, I have bleeding. So the patient knows and doctor also knows. Occult bleeding means he will present to you as anemia, where doctor will know by doing occult blood testing, but patient will not know. So patient will say that I don't have bleed, but you will say that, okay, your anemia is because of you are losing blood in stool. So that is occult bleeding. Obscure GI bleed can be overt bleed, like the patient may present to you as melena, or they can have occult bleed when they present as anemia. So we have to decide. I'll come to the algorithm how to manage these two patients who have melena. So obscure GI bleed with visible blood loss in stool has a more brisk bleeding as compared to those patients who have bleeding, but they are not able to see visually, but occult blood test is positive and they have minimal bleeding. So the diagnostic algorithm changes if you have brisk bleeding versus those who have very slow bleeding. We'll come to this thing. And another thing which we should always understand is that obscure GI bleed and small bowel bleed are not, interchangeable. You can have obscure GI bleed, which are missed lesion located within the reach of standard endoscopy. Now, there are some hidden lesions, like a patient who has intermittent Dulafy lesion, which is bleeding, and you do endoscopy while it was not bleeding, but the lesion lies well in the stomach. But you do an endoscopy and say, okay, this stomach is normal, and you go to the colon and you do a small bowel evaluation, you will not find anything because the lesion was there in the endoscopy, which was overlooked, or it has got a property that it might get hidden behind the mucosal fold once it is not bleeding. So obscure GI bleed include both missed lesion located within the reach of standard endoscopy as well as small bowel lesion. So a second look endoscopy is very, very important. So whenever a patient comes to you with GI bleed, which was obscure, and somebody has done endoscopy and colonoscopy, do again at your center in front of you. You may find on repeat endoscopy the cause of bleed in almost 50 to 75% of the patient. Or do a repeat colonoscopy, you may find a lesion there. So obscure GI bleed is combination of missed lesion plus small bowel lesion. So this is the causes of missed lesion: slow or intermittent bleeding, failure to detect vascular lesion because of anemia. There is a big AVM in stomach, and patient has completely is lost blood, and now he's so anemic that your vascular lesion is not visible. Patient has become dehydrated, the sedative will lose this. There is too much of blood or poor colon preparation, again will uh, hide that bleeding lesion. Always see ampulla. Whenever you see a patient who has a GI bleed and you do a normal endoscopy and colonoscopy, do a side viewing endoscopy always. Uh, because you may have a hemobilia or hemosuccus presenting as obscure GI bleed. And then you may pick it up by doing a side viewing endoscopy, and you don't be in hurry to see ampulla. You have to stay there for a 2 to 3 minute, do intermittent suction, and then only you say that ampullary bleed is not there. We have seen many residents doing here. They say, okay, sir, we have done side viewing endoscopy and it is normal, because they just went in, saw the papilla and came out. It is not like that. Venous bleed from hemosuccus is so intermittent and so slow that unless you spend some time in front of ampulla, you will not find. So always include a side wing endoscopy in your armamentarium or diagnostic algorithm once you are dealing with obscure GI bleed. Of course, CT scan is a very important modality. It will pick up some of the aneurysm which is leading to cause bleeding from ampulla, which is the most common. You can have a tumor in the liver which is bleeding into the biliary system. Of course, they will have BOM, biliary colic, obstructive jaundice, and melena. So this will be the triad. A patient will not come. So that was the history is very important, of course. So always talk about biliary colic, obstructive jaundice, history of chronic pancreatitis. These are a very important historical background once we are dealing with obscure GI bleed. And our case, which I saw, has a pancreatic head mass, has bled now after GJ and HJ. And we have done upper GI, we have done colon, we have done CT scan. We have not found anything. But so let us see what will happen in that case. So 10 to 20% of GI bleed again will fall out in the unidentified etiology. So of all cases you see, 10 to 20% may fall in this category. 5% of GI bleed recurrent without identified cause. In those cases, only 5% will belong to small bowel, which will require capsule endoscopy, which will require enteroscopy. So all these cases, you do repeat endoscopy, you do side viewing endoscopy, you do CT scan, you will find some bleeding source. But 5% will be limited to only small bowel. So to see small bowel, so never use obscure GI bleed interchangeably with small bowel bleed. Both are different. Obscure GI bleed is a big term. Small bowel is a small component of that. So coming to the obscure, real obscure is always limited to small bowel. So these will be like 4 etiologies: vascular lesion, neoplasm, inflammatory lesions, or other. So the small bowel lesions occur, the majority of the etiology will be obscure GI bleed, will be vascular lesion in Western population and ulceration in Indian population. So this is very important. Also see whether those patients whom, as I told, you have done a repeat endoscopy. You will find Cameroon ulcer. You will find a hiatus hernia and big ulcers inside. You may find a peptic ulcer on a posterior wall of duodenum. You will find angiodysplasia, which has disappeared because of acute bleed and now has reappeared once you have resuscitated the patient. Dulophy lesion, which was not bleeding at the time of initial endoscopy, has now again reappeared. Cave. These are some of the lesions which were overlooked. And real obscure lesions are. Yogesh, can you mute your mic, please? So the also depends on how old is the patient. If patient is young, always see for tumors like GIST. You should not jump on small bowel evaluation. You do a CT scan, ultrasound, you will find a GIST in small intestine. So a patient who is young will have these lesions, tumors, mostly GIST, either in small intestine or gastric GIST or duodenal GIST or mucus diverticulum, Dulophy lesions, and these Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. Those who are older will have angiodysplasias, NSAID enteropathy. Celiac disease usually present as anemia, but they may have occult blood loss. Uncommon, as I told, should always be seen: hemobilia, hemosuccus, and aortoenteric fistula. So these are the way where you can, by just mere seeing how old is the patient, are there any associated abnormalities like chronic pancreatitis, hemobilia. These are the patient you can quickly decide what test next. As I told, these I have already spoken to you. Small bowel visualization has been always difficult. Why? Because the length is very long and then it is not fixed. It is freely hanging in the peritoneum. So you push the scope, whole intestine will be pushed and you will not travel through the intestine. So because of the free intraperitoneal location, you will not be able to travel through that. That is why it is difficult to evaluate obscure GI bleed in small intestine. Vigorous contractility, as we have already seen, that patient will have a lot of peristaltic movement and overlying loops will not allow for other imaging modalities like barium and all to have proper evaluation. So that is why small intestine poses a challenge for endoscopists to evaluate the lesion located in small intestine. Diagnostic modalities are barium, enteroclysis. Other than the enteroscopy, these are the tests which can be done. Meckel scan. If a patient of 14 years old comes to me with obscure GI bleed, I will first send him for Meckel scan. If a patient of say 40 years come to me, I will send him directly for CT enteroclysis. I will be looking for GIST. I will be looking for Crohn's disease. A patient comes to me with 60-year-old, I will do enteroscopy or capsule endoscopy. So that is how I decide based on age, history, and other things. But these tests are also important. Apart from the angiography is the most important, which I feel a patient who is come to you with brisk bleeding and he is say BP of 70, and you want to do a test, the angiography will be the best test, where the bleeding is brisk, patient is hemodynamically unstable. You cannot take him for the enteroscopy because your anesthesiologist will not agree, and angiography becomes the first choice. So based on the clinical presentation of patient, you can choose these patients, choose the first investigation. You will of course do many investigations, but first investigation you can choose. But ultimately you will depend on these three: capsule endoscopy, deep enteroscopy, and CT or MR, enteroclysis. Previous to 2000, the bleeding were classified as upper GI or lower GI. Anything which is in the reach of upper GI endoscope is upper GI bleed, which is in the reach of colonoscope is lower GI, but small bowel also was included in lower GI bleed. Whatever is not upper GI is lower GI, but not now. Now we have three types of GI bleed: upper GI, lower GI, and lower tract. Why? Because the lesion which can be detected by upper GI endoscope and they are located proximal to ampulla of Vater are upper GI bleed. Those which can be tackled by colonoscopes and are limited from anus to ileocecal wall are known as lower GI bleed. While those bleeding which are from middle tract, like ampulla of Vater to IC valve, are real small intestinal bleed, and they are the rarest, and they are known as the middle GI bleed. So now no more upper GI and lower GI. You have to classify into three based on the presentation, based on the clinical scenario, based on the preliminary investigation. You decide which level the bleeding may be most likely. If you have a middle tract bleed, I think first case you have to do is capsule endoscopy. But before that, you should rule out obstructive causes. If you have a stricturous disease, patient has recurrent abdominal pain and has come to you with GI bleed, don't do capsule. Do capsule in older patients who have no abdominal pain. And if you have done a CT enteroclysis, it has not revealed any strictures, you can take it as first test. And capsule endoscopy travels throughout the intestine and give beautiful pictures. But the problem with that is that it does not have any hands to take biopsy or to arrest the bleed. You can do these tests on chronic diarrhea, obscure GI bleed, and you can have a very good diagnosis based on the capsule endoscopy, and you can classify your lesion into small bowel tumors, angiodysplasia, aphthous ulcers. The sensitivity is very good. Sensitivity is around 80%, but there are many non-specific uh, erosions which you will say that this is the cause of bleed, which in fact they are not. So the specificity goes down. But good thing is that if a patient comes to you with obscure GI bleed and capsule endoscopy is normal, that means the negative predictive value is fairly good. That means you can wait and watch that, okay, there is nothing serious. You just keep watching. So capsule endoscopy is good in picking the lesion, one, and two, it helps us in deciding the route of enteroscopy, because if the lesion lies in first 75 minutes of total capsule endoscopy time, you go by oral route, and if it lies in the last 1/4 time, then you go by retrograde route. So capsule endoscopy helps us in road mapping the lesions. Sometimes we may have a tumor which directly goes for surgery. Sometimes it is active bleeding briskly, they go for angiography. And if the lesion can be classified as those treatable by enteroscopy, then we can decide the route of enteroscopy. And if the capsule endoscopy is normal, we can reassure the patient that this was one of GI bleed. We have to wait and watch. We have not to do anything, invasive now. We will wait for another episode to occur, or it may not occur again. So capsule endoscopy is a good initial screening test. But unfortunately, the limitation of capsule endoscopy is that lack of air insufflation. There is no control on the movement. If a lesion is slipped, we cannot come back and see. There is no ability to sample the tissue. There is high rate of incidental finding like erosions or small ulcers. You cannot attribute those findings to real cause of GI bleed. Potential for missing solitary lesion is well known. And then, of course, as I told, if you do on a patient who has stricturous disease along with bleeding, you may have a stuck capsule. And this is what I was talking about, a stricture and capsule is stuck, and you have to refer this patient for surgery. This is the stricturous. Of course, this is malignant lesion anyway required surgery. Lesion which are basically towards peritoneal side, and a very small punctum is projecting into the lumen, and this will not be caught by a capsule endoscopy. This can be easily seen by ultrasound or by a CT scan. So if this patient is young, I will do first CT scan rather than capsule endoscopy. So these are the lesions which have got a disadvantage is that they may not be caught by capsule endoscopy. Then what next? So we have now enteroscopy available, and you have seen this has evolved from 1970s from the push enteroscopy to motorized spiral enteroscopy, which is the latest one. And basically the paradigm shift was brought in 2001 to 2010, where a lot of improvement in enteroscopy happened. And the first thing which came was Yamamoto's double balloon enteroscopy, which used an over tube with balloon and has shown first time that by enteroscope we can uh, completely examine the length of small bowel. Then came the single balloon and spiral enteroscopy. So basically, the enteroscopy is device, always device, because you cannot do full enteroscopy by bare endoscope. As I told, small bowel is a freely hanging structure, and if you push the small intestine by a bare endoscope, you will cause looping into the stomach. Patient will have a lot of pain, and small intestine will be pushed away. You will not be able to travel deep into the intestine by doing a bare enteroscopy. That is why it is always balloon assisted or device assisted enteroscopy. You have to have a device. Device can be the single balloon or double balloon, which I'll talk to you now. And then this is the double balloon enteroscopy. You can see here the enteroscope is not single enteroscope. It is a over tube is there, and you have to pass the enteroscope through this over tube, which has a balloon. Now, balloon is to fix the intestine, and then you pass the over tube forward. Then there is another balloon on over tube which fix the intestine there, and then you go through this deep into the intestine, avoiding looping into the stomach, and then you follow the balloon, and then once both the balloons are inflated, you pull back, and then you pleat the bowel behind this balloon. So you keep on shortening the intestine and you keep on progressing forward. So this is known as pull and push enteroscopy, where you keep on shortening the intestine, pleating the intestine behind, and achieving the length of deep insertion. The high end. So this is another way of doing enteroscopy, where you do not have a balloon on the enteroscope, yet there is a good flexibility on the scope which fixes the bowel, and then you keep on doing again push and pull enteroscopy with advancement of cycles. These are known as push and pull enteroscopy. These are good, as I told, 2001 to 2000, maybe 20 or maybe 18, we had only the enteroscopy done by these two methods. And we also used it in obscure GI bleed, and our pickup rate was 60%. And you can have many therapeutic procedures like APC, polypectomy, biopsies, which could be done using this. I'll show you some of the example. This is a patient who has come to us with GI bleed, and she was taking NSAIDs. And you can see the small intestine is filled with these deep ulcers which are actively bleeding, which were treated by APC, and they become all right. This is the Dulafy lesion of jejunum. Again, we were lucky to find it because it was bleeding when we did the enteroscopy. This bleeding is not that brisk, so it will never be. This patient required again 7 to 8 transfusion, but angiography was normal. For angiography to be positive, there has to be a rate of bleeding. So this rate was less than 0.5 ml per minute, and that is why it was not being picked up by the angiography. And then what we did was we injected adrenaline and then did coag grasper, because clip was not being passed because it was so deep into the small intestine that we could not pass um, the clips, but ultimately the bleed stopped. This patient has chronic steroid intake history because of his some joint problems, and has come to us with 25 kg weight loss. Now, small bowel when we did was looking like ulcerative colitis. It is totally diffuse ulcerations, and this is in 2007. This was one of the very rewarding case. Patient lost 25 kg weight. There is no clue, and you do small intestine endoscopy and take biopsies, and you send this histopathology and you see strongyloidosis. Whole of the small intestine mucosa is filled with strongyloidosis stercoralis larvae, and you do give ivermectin 3 doses, patient is absolutely fine. He regained the weight, and no way you could be able to diagnose this unless you do jejunal biopsy. And not only that, you can have many treatments also. Like this is a patient who has obscure GIB because of AVMs. You do APC and control that AVM. This is a patient who has intussusception because of the big polyp, and this is the huge polyp. And you apply the endoloop, and then you can do the polypectomy. You cut this polyp, you get the polyp for histopathology, and this patient become symptom free. So this was the small bowel examination which were available in era from 2001 to 2015 or 18. Then came this motorized spiral enteroscopy, which was preceded by its manual version. Now, this is the Paul Ackerman's idea, where they used a overtube which was spiral. And I will show you this cartoon first, where you can see the overtube, again device assisted, and there is an overtube which can be manually rotated by the hand, and you convert this rotation energy into linear energy, and you keep on pleating the bowel onto the enteroscope. So this is spiral enteroscopy, and you can see the two operators are required. One will rotate the overtube, and you can see how smoothly the small intestine is being traveled, because you are converting this rotational energy into linear energy. And as you see, Sandeep, who is looking young, and he's guiding my enteroscope to the place where the curves of the small intestines are going, and you keep on rotating. After some time, you will reach cecum, or you reach to the destination where this patient has Crohn's disease ulcer. You can see here, and you can take biopsies and make that diagnosis. So this was spiral enteroscopy. The good thing was that you can achieve the enteroscopy within half an hour to 20 minutes, and the depth of insertion was also reasonably good. And you can treat the patient with obscure GI bleed, malabsorption syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease. Then came the motorized version of this spiral. Now, Well, I did around 50 cases of more these manual spiral, and I developed a tennis elbow because it was so cumbersome. And of course, this over tube, which was manually rotated, was really long, and the transportation was difficult. Many problems were there. So the Olympus bought this company, and then they converted the manual to motorized version. So you can see a motor over there on the handle of the endoscope, which drives this spiral. And you can have a paddle which will move it forward or backward by rotating in clockwise or anti-clockwise respectively, so that you can travel inside or outside. And here is the example. You can see here, this is the pylorus, and you are just uh, driving a car in small intestine. You have to just uh, keep on, you can sit down first of all, and then you just have to rotate the knobs so that you guide the endoscope tip to the lumen, and rest is done by the endoscope. So you have to push the pedal like an accelerator, and you will keep on seeing the small intestine into the real depths, and you can reach to the cecum. As you can see, this is the cecum and the colon, and you have reached within say 25 to 30 minutes. So if the anatomy is favorable, like no adhesions, patient is previously not operated, he's well built, he's not so thin, then you may do this very quickly. But it is very recorded video, it is edited video, it is not that simple. Most of the time, what we do is we reach the endoscope by doing bidirectional endoscopy. Unfortunately, this video is not playing anyway. So you can achieve total enteroscopy by in around 60% of the patient, 30% antegrade, another 30% bidirectional, with a very good diagnostic yield of 65%. And you can have an inflammatory lesion, the vascular lesion, the mass lesion, and also you can do therapeutic procedures like balloon dilatation of the stricture, uh, and also like this patient who had patient who had Crohn's disease, and this patient had capsule endoscopy which was stuck. You can see the capsule over there. This is the capsule which was stuck, and then you do a spiral enteroscopy and reach to the stricture. And this patient are really, this patient was a renal failure patient, and he did not want the surgery to be done, and he had subacute intestinal obstruction. One, because of the capsule, he was worried what will happen to the capsule, will it cause any problem later on when I am traveling somewhere. So he wanted to get rid of the capsule and also address the basic problem. So we went ahead with spiral enteroscopy, and you can see how smoothly you travel through the small intestine using this enteroscope without much of the manual strain on your. And you can see now this is the stricture, but we cannot see the capsule because the capsule has traveled through this stricture and another stricture, and then it has lodged beyond those strictures. So you have to dilate these strictures. So we dilate with CRE balloon of around 1.5 centimeter, and then after dilatation you can uh, guide your enteroscopy tip inside, and you can see there is another stricture. So these are series of strictures, and then you dilate another one, and then you can see that the balloon dilatation is being done. And then after dilatation you pass the enteroscope, and you will get the capsule. So you have taken the biopsy of the stricture, you have dilated the stricture, and you have removed the foreign body. So enteroscopy is a very, very good procedure, a rewarding procedure, where you will have a diagnosis, you will have a treatment, and you may avoid a big laparotomy. Uh, this is another case which I feel the enteroscopy has brought paradigm shift. The Peutz-Jeghers syndrome patient. These patients keep on traveling from here to there for one recurrent anemia, and then second for their into susceptions, and you can see whole intestine is filled with large polyps. So you can see there's a huge polyp over there, around 5 centimeter polyp, and these patients will require surgery otherwise. And you can see here, you can do an EMR. This is a very broad base polyp into the small intestine, and you can elevate the polyp by injection and then do piecemeal EMR in almost a distal jejunum. Why you can do this? Because you have now a very good channel, the 3.2 channel, which is much larger than what we had with balloon assisted enteroscopy. Your scope is very straight. It is not like balloon assisted enteroscopy where there are multiple loops, where it will be very difficult for you to bring out the accessories. And these accessories, because of the coag grasper, other thing which will be required, and then you can complete this procedure, and then you will have a very good specimen available for histological assessment. Not only that, you keep on doing, you complete the examination, you reach to the cecum, and each one of the polyp is removed. These polyps, though small, can be the leading point for into susception. So you have to keep on doing till you reach cecum. This is the cecum. You can see this whole colon is filled with water, and then you come back, and then you again examine whether you have left anything or not. So you do thorough job. You completely remove the polyps, no chance of further into susception, no chance of bleeding. Then keep this patient under follow-up for other malignancies like for ovarian cancer or breast cancers, and then you can do a very good job using this new endoscopes. So now the question is, which is better, single balloon, double balloon, or spiral? In fact, each one has got his own advantages and disadvantages. Spiral enteroscopy require deep sedation or general anesthesia. Uh, Children you cannot do. Single balloon is very quick, easy to assemble. If the lesion is in proximal intestine, I usually prefer to do single balloon enteroscopy. Double balloon enteroscopy is from different company, and it has largest amount of literature available, but it is time consuming, it is cumbersome to assemble. So each has got his own advantages and disadvantages. You can do according to your own expertise in your field. But I think spiral enteroscopy and balloon assisted enteroscopy still are complementary to each other. And so is balloon assisted enteroscopy and capsule endoscopy. You cannot say capsule endoscopy is better or enteroscopy is better. No, overall yield remains same, but I want to say that capsule endoscopy can be a guide for enteroscopy, though the cost factor will come. But ultimately, if a patient has obscure occult GI bleed, never go with enteroscope, because there are chances that you may not find anything. So always take a help of capsule endoscopy and do enteroscopy. But if patient has obscure overt bleed, like this patient of melena, then you should do enteroscopy directly also. There is not a problem. For most obscure GI bleed, capsule endoscopy should be performed before enteroscopy to direct the best initial route. For active bleeding in the hospital setting, it may be cost effective to go directly with enteroscopy. Don't do capsule if there is a melena or there is a brisk bleeding. Either do angio or do enteroscopy. Sometimes you may require to do a nuclear scan, but they are usually non-specific. Most commonly used method is technetium 99 labeled RBC scan. This has got a long half-lives, and it allows for repeat scanning in 24 hours. The late pooled blood may not be identified. So you can see a pool of blood over there, and you have to predict that the bleeding is somewhere in the small intestine, and then you may go for enteroscopy. But in our clinical setting, almost not done. Angiography is very, very important, especially if the bleeding is very severe and patient is actively bleeding during and requiring transfusion. Always choose an angiography. If patient is hemodynamically compromised, is actively requiring transfusion, don't do anything, do angiography. And these are other things like anticoagulant, vasodilators, but these are very risky things. Should not do this. But mostly the message from myself is a patient who is hemodynamically unstable, actively requiring transfusion, no enteroscopy, no capsule endoscopy, only angiography. So individualized based clinical treatment on presentation is required. Intermittent bleeding, overt or occult, you go for capsule first. Acute ongoing overt bleed, patient hemodynamically stable, balloon assisted enteroscopy or a spiral enteroscopy. Acute bleed with hemodynamically instability, angiography. Obstructive symptoms, don't do capsule endoscopy. Either do CT enterography or MR enterography and then do balloon assisted enteroscopy or surgery. So this is the way which we treat occult bleeding, overt bleeding, massive. So always decide whether the patient has occult bleeding, overt bleeding, or massive bleeding. Massive bleeding, as I told, either you can go for angiography, and if you have no angiography available, go for balloon assisted enteroscopy. Occult bleeding, overt bleeding, always do a second look endoscopy. Always do a second look endoscopy, because in more than 50% of the time you may find the lesion. If negative, you say that the lesion is in a small bowel. Then you see whether obstruction is there or no obstruction is there by clinical symptoms, by CT scan. If no obstruction, do capsule endoscopy. Whether capsule endoscopy is positive, you may direct this patient for either enteroscopy or surgery. If patient is negative for capsule, just wait. If patient is not further bleeding, just observe or may do medical treatment. If patient is actively bleeding again, you can consider repeat capsule endoscopy or CT or MR enterography, Meckel scan, surgery, or intraoperative enteroscopy. If you have obstructive symptom, always do CT scan or MR enteroscopy and follow the way which I told. Regarding coming back to our patient, which I told you, a 40-year-old patient who has required 32 transfusions, upper GI endoscopy and colonoscopy were normal. There was a portal vein thrombosis, portal cavernoma, and this patient required enteroscopy. And then there we found jejunostomy, and then we did a distal examination which was normal. Then we went into the excluded segment to the Roux-en-Y loop, and then we went to the stoma of the liver, and you can see this is the intrahepatic biliary ducts, and we have reached through the Roux-en-Y loop to the HJ stoma, and what we found was junctional varices. You can see huge varices there, which are the cause of GI bleed in this patient. And this is the real sense obscure GI bleed, where even capsule endoscopy was normal because it did not go into the excluded segment. And then we did glue injections into these hepatic stomal varices, and then this bleed was completely stopped, and we can see the reduction in the stomal varices around the bile duct. Patient meanwhile developed some ascites because he had many transfusions and he was almost decompensated. But ultimately, it was not cirrhosis, and then patient recovered after once his hemodynamic stability was brought in. So, dear friends, I think I'll stop here This was my um, views and my experience regarding obscure GI bleed and enteroscopy in particular. I've been doing this procedure since last almost 15 to 20 years, and I feel enteroscopy is a very important armamentarium in any unit, any gastro unit. You cannot do without enteroscopy. Thank you very much for your patience here.
Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful talk, and it is good to see the variety of cases that you have brought in, because it is difficult to see so many difficult cases together in one discussion. So I have a question that we recently had a patient with von Willebrand disease having obscure GI bleed.
Uh-huh.
How do you manage these patients? Like,
So these patients will require hematological reviews, and you may have to give some FFPs. But von Willebrand factors disease will have bleeding because of angiodysplasia also, and you can treat those underlying cause by doing APC of those lesions. But majority of the time, they will require some sort of fresh frozen plasma or some other treatments from hematological point of view rather than mechanically treating a small bowel lesions.
right. So in our patient, endoscopy and colonoscopy were normal twice, and the patient was on regular factors, and he required 30 to 40 transfusions. So we did capsule, and as you rightly said, that it guided us that probably the bleeding was from middle part of jejunum from angioectasia. Then it was coagulated.
Yeah.
So
Dr. Chirag, do you want to ask or can I proceed?
yeah, so I basically wanted to ask that, just wanted to put in discussion that where do you think there is a role of surgery in today's era for obscure GI bleed?
For obscure GI bleed, surgery is definitely required for treatment point of view. If you find a gist, you have to do surgery. For diagnostic purposes, I don't think there is any role of surgery now because if you have a negative capsule, negative enteroscopy with documented pan enteroscopy, that is must. If you have a documented pan enteroscopy, either your enteroscope has gone from oral to cecum or you have done a retrograde and you have put a clip and you have found out that clip, that means you have done full enteroscopy, and then you do not do surgery for diagnosis point of view. If you do a laparotomy and laparotomy is negative, that is a big trauma, so but if you find a lesion, say a long length colonic stricture, you have gist, you still go for surgery. But if you are not able to have expertise of doing pan enteroscopy, suppose you have done enteroscopy and single balloon has gone to mid jejunum, and you have gone from the ileum to say 10 to 20 centimeter or 50 centimeter, and still the patient is bleeding. That means you have not examined it completely and you do not have the expertise available, or the patient, then you have to do pan enteroscopy using intraoperative enteroscopy. That is the indication of surgery. Rather than, if you have documented good pan enteroscopy, don't do surgery for, rather than you wait. Once you have done a good CT scan, it has ruled out major issues like gist or any other thing. You have done Meckel scan, which is negative. We have found out some of the cases of Meckel scan, which was Meckel negative, and they were picked on retrograde enteroscopy. They ultimately required surgery. But if you have done a good pan enteroscopy, good CT scan, negative, better to wait. Even the patient is bleeding, you can start them on sandostatin LAR, or you can start them on thalidomide and wait and watch. Don't jump on surgery.
So, Dr. Mohan, really enjoyed your talk, and I thank Dr. Yogesh and his team for providing this opportunity, wherein I learned a lot. I want to specifically, it seems that the Achilles heel of endoscopic evaluation, that was the small bowel, has been conquered. I want to ask you, what is the incidence of bowel perforation or iatrogenic trauma in patients who undergo balloon or motorized spiral endoscopy?
So that's a good question. So for diagnostic, and if you are quite experienced enough, you will not perforate. I have perforated twice, and both were because of stricture dilatation. Because at that time, once I did 2 centimeter dilatation over enthusiastically, but I now limited myself to 1.5 centimeter, and I don't do dilatation for long strictures. I do for short strictures. So we have learned our lessons, and the majority of the procedures perforations come when you do therapeutic endoscopy, and not by diagnostic. We have not seen.
We have one question, sir, from the audience.
Chat box.
Stool occult blood test, how much it is significant in Indian scenario?
Stool occult blood test is important. You have to do, the only way which you can say the patient who has anemia and you have occult blood test positive, you have to predict that this is obscure occult GI bleed. If your stool occult blood test is negative, then you presume that the anemia is because of some other cause. Why? I don't know why Indian scenario, why it should be different from the Western scenario. Chirag, because there are parasitic infestations which may cause hookworm infestation. Of course, you will treat that. Celiac disease also may have stool for occult blood positive, but celiac disease, Indian scenario, parasitic infestation is one cause where one should treat before, doing any test. But I will not do for an old patient. If a patient who has like 60s or 50s, 50 plus, chance of malignancy is high, occult blood positive, that has to be taken very seriously, whether it's India scenario or not. But a very young patient who has come to us with, like, say 25, 30 and has occult blood positive, don't do test before deworming. I think I usually deworm and then see again, but not all cases. I take occult blood positive very seriously if that is there, and I do not lose the follow-up of patient. I make sure that what is the cause of this occult positive.
Agree. Do you prefer any specific kind of occult blood test, stool occult blood test, or it's available?
That is good, but Guaic test is actually says heme oxygenase actually, and the problem is that if you are taking iron tablets, and then the reading is important. If sometimes it may come as false positive if you are taking iron, or if you are taking the red meat, which contain that enzyme. One has to be very, very sure about stopping all those, taking all precautions when you are doing Guaic test. Otherwise, it is as good as any other test. But my preference is, I don't know whether it's available in India or not. You have any particular test? I'm not sure about immunoglobulin based test.
No, immunoglobulin based tests are available, but many a times in small centers where they use this simple Guaic based screening test, this is the problem, what you said. So that is why the physician probably asked that how seriously we have to take this stool occult blood test. So I think, as you rightly said, we have to rule out the other possibilities of Guaic based test positivity, and then maybe take it seriously.
Of course.
Sir, I have seen your slides, and there was a case when you did 3 stricture dilatation and pulled out the capsule. So, how many cases you have seen there are repeated strictures in the small bowel, repeated dilatation is required or repeated balloon dilatation is required?
In many cases, especially Crohn's disease patients should earn their surgery. You should not do surgery for very short stricture. You do one surgery, you after some time patient will develop another stricture. So you will keep on doing surgeries and short bowel. So though the surgeons have evolved their surgery, do the stricturoplasty, other things, but if the strictures are amenable for dilatation, like if you do a CT enteroclysis, the stricture is less than 2 centimeter. Uh, I still do repeated balloon dilatation. I have do 2-3 cases who required repeated balloon dilatation, and surgery was postponed as far as possible. We may not avoid surgery, but those patients will definitely get benefited by dilatation. But you have to choose patient. Uh, All patients are not amenable for dilatation. You have, as this patient was there, those strictures were many, but they are short strictures. You can see through the strictures. But those patients who what I do is I do enteroscopy, I inject contrast through it. And if there is a long stricture, I don't even dilate that. And if there is a lot of inflammation around, they are not fibrotic, they do not require dilatation. We start medical treatment because inflammation may subside by steroid and other things. But those who are short fibrotic strictures, even post Cox, sometime we find these strictures, these are amenable for dilatation. So the indication of repeated dilatations are very less. But in my 10 to 15 years, I think I have done 3 patients with repeated dilatation, and but not many.
Yogesh, please unmute yourself.
So there is one young lady who presented with chronic abdominal pain almost for 5 to 6 months. So CT was showing a possibility of neuroendocrine tumor or GIST in mid-jejunal area. So we did a single balloon enteroscopy and we could find that lesion. It was only 1 centimeter. We took biopsies and surprisingly it came out to be pancreatic heterotrophy. So what would be the management, sir, for this patient?
First of all, whether it is the cause of abdominal pain or it's an incidental finding.
So I think it's an incidental finding because
I think if the patient is young, she is having 5 years history of abdominal pain. I don't think we should attribute that lesion to the
only
pain.
2-3 months, only 2-3 months, not much.
But I will find out other causes of abdominal pain rather than into that.
Yeah, ma'am. That's not ma'am.
So Yogesh, do we have time or?
Yeah. Sir, if you agree to 2-3 questions more, there are
Yeah. No
interesting
problem.
questions. I think Chirag, you can ask few questions. Smith Kumar Vagasia has asked 3 to 4
Yeah.
questions. I think all of them are very interesting.
So I think the first question is inflammatory versus fibrotic stricture and when to dilate stent or stent for small intestinal strictures.
So we don't do stent for benign strictures because if you put a fully covered stent, they will migrate, and we only do stenting for malignant strictures with that uncovered stent, which will stay there. Inflammatory versus fibrotic is very easy to say. On CT also or MR also, you can have a rough idea of whether the stricture is inflammatory, there is ongoing perilesional edema, or there is, by seeing the MR, you can decide that this is a solid fibrotic stricture with no inflammation that is not going to get cured by steroids. It may require surgery or balloon dilatation or an inflammatory stricture. If you do enteroscopy, you will see a lot of edema around it. Even in CT scan or MR, you will have the distinction between bowel layers can be seen in inflammatory stricture, while that will not be seen if the fibrotic strictures are there. You can see the mucosa, submucosa, and differential layering architecture by MRI, and you can say that this is inflammatory stricture, and this will be responding to escalation of steroids or giving the infliximab or other immunosuppressant. They will respond to that, while the fibrotic strictures will not respond. They will require, if the strictures are fibrotic, longest stricture, you better send them. And most important is symptomatic. If they are symptomatic, recurrent SAIO, long stricture, you should refer these patients for surgery. If they are short stricture, we can attempt to do enteroscopic dilatation also.
Another question is, how do you manage hemophilia or hemosuccus?
Oh, that's very important question. And first thing which we do is to do a CT angiogram, and that will decide whether there is an aneurysm or not. Most of the time, the aneurysm is the cause of hemophilia, and you have to refer these patients to interventional radiologist where they can coil embolize it, or if the aneurysm is in the vicinity of GI tract, like splenic artery aneurysm or GDA aneurysm, you can embolize it by EUS guided coil and glue also, or thrombin also. The second important cause is hemosuccus pancreaticus, where if the arterial bleeding is ruled out, sometimes chronic pancreatitis causing splenic vein thrombosis, and then there are multiple collaterals around the pseudocyst which bleeds into the PD. These patients require either distal pancreatectomy or devascularization, or sometimes conservative management also helps in such patient. So basically, to do a cross-sectional imaging, identify the cause of hemosuccus or hemophilia. Majority of the time, aneurysm is the cause. Second cause is the tumor, which again will go to the surgical colleagues to see whether it is resectable or not. Chronic pancreatitis is another cause. So based on the cross-sectional imaging, you can decide the treatment.
So, Chirag bhai, any further discussion or you would like to share your experience?
I think we have covered most of the things, I think. So the last question, I think, was placed by somebody that, do you biopsy all the strictures or not?
Of course, yes. We have to do biopsy, and sometimes we find a very, very vague answer. As I showed, there was edema all over the intestine, and then it was strongyloidosis. So always do biopsy, though majority of the time it will come as non-specific. You will not find granulomas and other thing, but it is better to have biopsies. Now we have gene expert available. You can have a distinction between Crohn's and TB by doing biopsies. So it is always important to take biopsies.
Okay, sir. So Yogesh, I think we are done with the question. So you can take it forward now.
So thank you, sir, so much. It was a very lucid presentation, and once again, heartily thank you that you gave us time from your busy schedule and educated doctors from our region. I thank Rashesh bhai, Chirag Shah, as well as Yash Sanghvi, who contributed for today's academic session. And thank you all participants. At the end, I thank my mentor and course director, Dr. Mahesh Goenka, who is guiding us to continue this sessions. And I thank Sun Pharma Solaris team, who is helping technically to conduct these sessions. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogesh, Chirag, Rashesh, Yash, and everyone for giving me this opportunity. I think I enjoyed a lot myself and learned a lot with the discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.